in South Dakota that has small cells currently is Sioux Falls, but certainly we'd hope that would be a continued advancement around the state.
Because my understanding, we went through that whole lengthy process to eliminate exactly this. So now here we are again at ground zero.
So the technology is not out there yet to do that, or there's not a desire from the companies to do that? I don't remember that discussion.
Well, it is in Sioux Falls. There are other options.
Yeah, those are just primarily in more dense urban areas at this point. I'm not, who knows, maybe eventually they could make it to Brandon, but those small 5G sites generally cover like a city block, as opposed to a tower like this would, has probably a 3-4 mile radius.
I want to argue that we are dense, but maybe I better not.
So tonight, this is a discussion item, so what does that really mean, Patrick?
So the discussion item mostly at the end of the day comes down to, are you willing to work with them and to what extent? How much are you willing to modify our current regulations? There are some examples that they included about what other communities have in place. Obviously, we're not Sioux Falls or Harrisburg or whatever, but they're kind of showing you what most do. We don't have to do that, but that's what most do. So basically, are you willing to work with them on it? Is this something you are interested in amending to? The problem in our code, even if you can't meet the requirements, it comes down to federal law would basically override us if they could prove a significant gap in coverage and there's no other place that would fill that gap. The problem they run into is they are a tower builder. They don't provide coverage. The carriers provide coverage. They provide a tower. So that's kind of where that runs into a problem with them.
Districts. So it's not that we don't.
It is allowed.
Yeah. The south side of town is primarily NRC and residential zoning districts. From what I've looked at, neither one of those are allowed uses.
So if you didn't come to us as a builder, but a carrier came to us and said, hey, we don't have enough capacity and our people are not being served, would that make a difference? Because then they would have the federal law behind them?
We did include in the packet a letter from Verizon.
Okay.
I think it's maybe further down
So
in here.
it's the color blotches at the end. So, but yes, if they were a carrier, they could take advantage of that exception. You could either issue a permit if they meet the requirements or if they have sufficiently proven these things. And I'm not an expert on reading coverage maps or anything, so at that point we would probably hire an engineering firm to help us through the process just to make sure we are interpreting it right. And I have talked to DGR and they are willing should we get to that stage.
NRC does allow this by conditional use along with several other.
NRC allows a base station. A base station is if you hook the equipment on like the side of the school. A tower is different than a base station.
Yeah, red's the densest coverage. So the first map you're looking at is kind of what it looks like today. The second map would show what it would look like if we installed the second tower. And like I said, this isn't really a white space. If you went on the south side of Brandon, you'll probably have a couple of bars. It's more just a density question, especially when Hugh when the races are going. There's just not nearly enough capacity.
And yet,
Sorry?
Huset's turned you down for putting it there.
Surprisingly, yeah. Yeah, unfortunately. And as I understand it, we looked at several
They should deal with
parcels.
that then,
Yeah.
if they're the ones that are causing the issue, but yet they don't wanna be,
And they're not in the city limits.
right. That's why I'm struggling with this a little bit. So, based on recent changes to our ordinance, our NRCs are gonna go away. They're gonna be very minimal. So what's allowed in there now, we're putting over into institutional at the city's request. So the public types of parcels. So golf courses, if we were to do a new golf course, it would probably be institutional. If we were to do a new public park, it would probably be institutional. So what does that leave? Agriculture, single-family detached dwelling, cemeteries, and group homes. Not a big demand for that in Brandon.
NRC is basically going to be a temporary holding area when
Right.
something is annexed into the city and before it's rezoned as something.
Right. And so that's why I'm a little nervous saying, okay, well, that's our solution here. Let's put them in NRCs. Because then what's going to happen, we're going to put it in an area that's in its early infant stages that we don't know what we're doing with it.
And when we talked to Patrick, and I think we're open to either route, as I understand it, the only way this would work is if we proposed the language change around the NRC code, or we applied for a rezone to something like industrial. I mean, I don't know what's more agreeable.
And there would be some still text changes we'd have to make, like the 300 feet would be still an issue. And there are other things, but could they rezone to a district where it would be up to Alliance basically whether they wanted to try.
Well, aren't utilities eligible to go into institutional zoning? Wasn't that one of the things we talked about when we formed that zoning?
I think the public and neighborhood utility facilities, I think, are allowed in every district just because they're everywhere. But we would need to officially determine what happens in Alliance's building. Is it storage or is it actually a utility building? What's happening in there? I don't know. I'd have to talk to probably Paul Vandenberg and find out.
You wanna know what's in institutional permitted uses, or do you see that? House of worship, library, school, cemetery, governmental building, public park, neighborhood utility facility, public utility facility, electrical substation.
What's our definition of facility? Could a tower be considered a facility?
Neighborhood utility facility is telephone, electric, and cable television lines, poles and equipment, water or gas pipes, mains and valves, sewer pipes and valves, lift stations, telephone exchanges and repeaters, and all other facilities and equipment, excluding buildings, facilities, and above-ground structures that exceed 600 square feet in area, necessary for conducting a service by a government or public utility. And neighborhood is basically anything that is that, but above the 600. Public is above 600, neighborhood is below 600. So it's very broad. We just need to make some kind of determination that Alliance is in fact a public utility for it to qualify in there. Probably I would have to look into the law in that sense.
Yeah, it seems like that definition would cover a lot of things that I would think of as precursors to cell phone use. Landline telephones, cable, television, things like that, so maybe consider infrastructure is
to
warranted.
update the wording to include, what do I want to say, internet, I don't, I'm trying to think of a different word, but yeah, internet.
The reason we're running into this is because the development of Brandon to the south has been strictly residential, right? Because we would allow this in,
If they were commercial across from Hughes's, there would be land you could put it at, conceptually, assuming the 300 feet or whatever, if you want to zone for that. But there would be more space potentially.
and because we haven't developed far enough yet along the highway, there is no commercial development. But what does the long-range plan have for that area?
So there is Oak Ridge down there. I don't know if you talked to Oak Ridge or not, but I know the developer of Hughes's has thrown out some general plans of what he wants to do, and it's generally pretty mixed use. So that's probably 5 to 10 years out. Maybe they'll get some big offer and it'll start tomorrow. I don't know, but we just kind of assume 5 to 10 years out. But so otherwise, other than Oak Ridge and Hughes's developing, my guess it's going to be pretty similar to what's there now, with just residential and detention areas, and so Hughes's is kind of the trigger there on when they develop.
And as I understand it, that little triangle you see where we're kind of going is essentially like a floodplain. You know, I don't know that it's developable land for really much beyond just a retention,
The
water
open area
retention.
is the city's detention pond. We would not allow a tower to be built in the middle of a detention pond.
Another note that's important to some people anyways is we designed it to be 120 feet. Towers under 200 feet don't have to have a light. Sometimes that's a concern I hear, is we don't want a blinking red light. There won't be lights. There's no sound. So there's not really any disturbance from either of those standpoints.
I do have some concerns with what I'm seeing here for this particular location and installation, is it's right on the edge of the property, and you're putting a 120-foot tower 6 feet away from the property line. I know when we have talked about these kinds of things, like the residential towers, we required a distance from the property line equal to the height of the towers. So I guess that's one concern. I don't know if we're to the point of getting into the weeds of this particular installation versus a change to our ordinance. But now, granted, it is in a flood area, and there will never probably be a built structure over there. But I think whatever we do, that to me needs to be a consideration, the size of the parcel.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear. I'm glad you made the point about the height of the tower that you're describing in this, and the lights and that, because that makes a difference. It's near the schools and actually not so far from my house, so I'm glad there wouldn't be a, if it were there, it wouldn't be a flashing red light, but I know we're not necessarily talking about this exact thing, so I can recognize the need, even if it's not this particular proposal, of expansion of cell coverage in some way in the now or in the relatively near future. So
I would mention sometimes it's attractive to communities we work with that we're more than open to allowing the use of the tower for public safety. So sometimes local fire stations, police departments, and things can put their equipment on the tower. We build the towers to be able to support 4 tenants. So it's not like we're just building this for Verizon. There's there's public uses, you know, the hope would be that there'd be coverage from AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile in time. So I haven't spoken with the fire department or the police department or anything. There may or may not be a need for that sort of public safety, but that is a traditional use of towers.
I guess for me, kind of, I feel it's very close to our residential and to the schools. I wasn't on the board when you guys went through the whole cell phone tower thing last time, but I do know there was a lot of public comment on it that I remember. And I feel like there's probably going to be a lot of backlash that's so close to the houses. Now, I know if we allow it there, it's what it is, but I feel like it's very close to those residential houses and to the schools. Me personally, I probably wouldn't buy a house that's that close to a telephone tower, but that's just me.
So if, just as an example, if you go down south a little ways where Ben Rifle Middle School is, there is a cell tower quite close to Ben Rifle and the surrounding neighborhood. So there is some examples of that, if you just want an example to look at kind of how it looks like in real life. I have talked to the school district. Dr. Larson was not necessarily opposed. We didn't have a lot of information at the time, but he wasn't fundamentally opposed.
To having it here or on
Yes.
his property?
This site. We didn't talk about their property specifically. I just, you know, we get a concept in, you know, and I just want to run it by him since the school is a big major player in town with the proximity, and they would generally probably have a good read on the pulse of what their parents dropping kids off and everything would probably think about it.
And they actually, as I understand it, they own that open farmland across. We looked into that. Unfortunately, they're not allowing for it.
I mean, that's not gonna be residential in the future, not that close to a racetrack, not that close to that.
The
Highway.
plans we saw, they had some residential in there. It was mostly to the northern part, though, kind of an extension of.
And it's got the elevation to provide better coverage. That to me is just makes much more sense. Now, that's not in the city limits, we're not zoning that, that's county. You said the county's not interested in addressing this?
Minnehaha County wouldn't prohibit us from building a tower. It's just that we weren't able to find a piece of land south of Brandon that would be viable.
So what would you like from us, Patrick?
Are you interested with us working with them on proposed language changes to bring back? Are you not interested at all? How would you like to proceed? Is it worth having more discussion, or are you pretty firm on you're not going to change regulations?
Well, if we change regulations, it doesn't mean that it would have to go here. It's just, this is our only option, their only option at this point. Or if we change regulations, we're really tailoring it to their site, is what you're saying.
You could take either approach. You could, if you look at the regulations generally and think maybe we need to change them to be a little bit more market friendly, generally, whether it provides for this site or not, or project. But yeah, if the changes make sense broadly, maybe that'd be, I don't know. It's open. It's up to whether you think our regulations need to be where they are, or if you are open to working through it a little bit more.
In towers, I included in the packet some information about this. They're pretty standardly an approved use in NRC land or equivalent. So some of the surrounding communities already include that in their language. It's just not something that's included in Brandon's language at the moment. It's kind of a public debate whether communications qualify as public utilities. So, but I don't know. That would be, I guess, up for the interpretation of the city of Brandon whether or not they would let a tower qualify as a public utility.
These coverage maps, are they current? Like, of what the city of Brandon looks like right now? Cause like with the tower up, it looks like it gives a lot of coverage to places that aren't necessarily developed yet.
I would defer to
Cause it looks
the
like
builder about if
most,
the maps are current.
most of the coverage goes to the south, where it looks like it's farmland.
Right. I mean, the idea is to provide as much coverage for the south side of Brandon as possible. So red is ideal. Yellow is still, you're going to have 4 bars. There's not a concern there. Green is where you start to, have some concerns. Right now you have a considerable amount of the southwest side of Brandon that has green coverage, which is just less than ideal at current moment. But I understand what you're saying, that it certainly provides for coverage to the south. And, the alternative to that would be to build the tower higher, but I don't know that anybody would necessarily be thrilled about that either. We like to try to keep them relatively short when they're in town.
So I'm sorry, red is poor coverage?
Red is the best coverage on this map. And then yellow is second best, green is third best, blue is not really.
So the area we're looking at is already red.
I guess I'm not.
I'm on page 119. The tower,
That's if they build the tower, 119 is what it would be. 118 is what it is right now. If I'm
Correct.
understanding
Correct.
correctly.
oh, okay.
So, like I was saying, that red extends mostly south into farmland right now.
So who would stand to benefit from this most?
Uses.
Huset's. Why don't they want it?
You should have come in here a year and a half ago before Huset's wanted to do what they did. It does put my house in the red, so I mean,
I think it certainly provides better coverage for those houses on the south side of town.
How would the city feel about putting it in Aspen Park?
I don't want to speak for him, but I don't know if the city administrator would be open to that or not. So you would have to ask Brian. My guess is likely not. Brian's had some bad experiences with cell towers, I think. So, but you'd have to ask him. Maybe.
I mean, there's still a lot of green areas. I guess that's not what we're here to talk about today. What areas do we currently have that are still NRC?
On the map there or behind you, the green is the NRC.
Patrick, is it Which of those colors currently allow for towers? I'm not sure. I don't have the
The
color
blue.
code memorized.
This little bit that is going to be rezoned that they just talked about to the institutional currently would, I would have to look whether it's basically the blue and the gray would be your industrial and your commercial.
So there's really just there's no lots that are blue or gray on the south half of Brandon that would be large enough, at least as I understand it.
So all of the green is NRC, none of that is privately owned. Correct?
Some of those lots along Sioux are to the east of Sioux.
Yeah, besides those. But those are getting converted to R.
So, a fair amount. This is the Husitz land.
Right,
So that's
they said
privately owned.
they haven't been able to get that.
Yes. So then you have all the houses there. For the most part, most of this in here is privately owned still, the green. I mean, you have the city's piece there, but the rest of it, I think, is pretty much privately owned.
So that's my concern is it's NRC because we haven't developed it yet.
Ideally, the places with
And so
houses
to me-
now would
to me,
eventually
putting
be
it
a
in
residential
NRC
district.
isn't the solution. Because that's like, okay, we've annexed it, but we're not sure exactly what we're gonna do with it yet. So to me, that doesn't mean, all right, let's put one in here. But yet, we're hoping that it becomes residential, or we're hoping that it becomes something else.
So wireless facilities are not a permitted or conditional use in institution. Would that be a better route to go?
Problem with institutional is that's public, so that doesn't help because these are privately owned facilities. So, and they have to be a half acre,
Minimum lot size is 1 acre.
or 1 acre,
So
sorry.
that lot would definitely be quite a bit smaller. It does allow more than one use on a lot, so that would overcome one of the hurdles.
What are water towers considered? What is that new water tower, what is that zone? That's what county? Is it? So when the city grows, what's it gonna be zoned? Institutional?
Current towers are one residential, the in-city tower, which probably needs to be rezoned.
Okay, so do we feel like this is an issue that is something that the city needs to deal with, or is this an issue that we don't?
I think the city will, but I don't know if the need is that great today. And I have some of the same concerns thinking through it of the discussion about the NRC, because I agree adding new uses to a zone that's not something that we're actively pushing for development in is probably not a great idea in my opinion. And I would still, so at some point there probably needs to be a discussion about this, because looking at the east side of town and different things,
Next issue.
there's gonna be a need for this in some fashion relatively soon, so, but when we do that, I'd like to see consideration also of setbacks and things, so that it's not towering over people's homes and things like that too, so. That doesn't help a lot, that's not much to go on, but. a similar property under an institutional zone, or that even though a standalone for something like this would be unlikely that someone would want to invest, what, an acre? Was that the minimum? But similar to what the proposal is here, if it was able to be an add-on and an additional use with some other property in an institutional zone, I mean, that, there's a lot to discuss there, but, you know, it seems maybe
Patrick,
possible.
did you do the stuff that's on page 101?
Most likely not. I didn't write anything to put in the packet on this, so that might be a submission from the applicant. Yeah, that's from the applicant. That probably summarizes, the examples are, we had talked about, maybe it would be helpful you all to see what kind of similar communities do, but no, this is put together by them.
Because Sioux Falls says it's allowed in conservation and recreation districts. To me, that sounds also like publicly owned land. So I guess I'd want to maybe investigate that a little bit more as to how they're putting private structures on what's more than likely public land.
We can look into it some more.
Yeah, so, and then the bottom of that page, they talk about the setbacks. Harrisburg, 1.5 times, or sorry, 1.1, and Sioux Falls, the height 150.
So is this something that you want to keep on the agenda for next time with further information, or?
I think we're gonna have to, I mean, at some point, we're gonna have to add towers in our community. Where and how? Where are the towers now?
So there's one up on North 9th Street. It's a 190-foot self-support tower, which basically means it has these steel cross members. That's the only one you have in town right now.
That's in the industrial park, the Berkman Industrial Park, kind of near where the HI, General Business Lobby talks about was. You can, it kind of blends in, but if you drive through there, you'll see it. And there is some equipment on the water tower, I believe. So those are kind of
On the high
Yes.
school one?
Yes.
The new water tower is set up for communications, but nobody's currently on it.
So that will cover the east growth. So how does that work then? Do you guys lease that out to Verizon or AT&T or?
Yes, yep, they would lease that space. It has been our stance to not allow anymore, so once the current leases are up, we're not renewing them. So I don't know what that really means for the new tower, if there'll ever be communications there, but we did set it up for communications in case the city wanted their own communications on there someday.
Oh, for your emergency
For emergency
communications.
vehicles,
Yeah.
yep.
So it wouldn't, the new water tower would not allow for, other, for like Verizon and stuff?
I mean, ultimately, that would be a city council decision to ask for that lease and work through that process. I think there's just a lot of headache that is involved, say, like, when they repainted the old tower, the city actually had to pay these companies to remove their equipment so that we could paint it, so then they had to put it back up. So there's things that you could work through with a new lease agreement, that requires them to take the equipment down, but from what I've heard, it was pretty expensive for the city, so we just assume not have those headaches.
But that would cover the east side
It would.
if we get a shortage.
How do they make that work without the adjacent building structures to accommodate their equipment on the ground?
So the one that's by the high school, there is a building right there.
It's all inside of that?
Yep. So they own that building too. The city doesn't own that.
Yeah.
They are slowly removing some of that, and I kind of think that building is vacant. They asked us if we wanted it, I think, but as of now, it just sits there.
Because the one you're proposing has more significant structures.
So in modern modern times, they don't typically build a full enclosed shelter anymore. Verizon wouldn't. They just have a ground-mounted hub, and they sit on a concrete pad that's probably like 4 by 4 feet. So they've gotten quite a bit smaller with modern technology.
I thought it looked larger on your proposed plan.
And to add, in our new tower, we have kind of a second floor, and that whole second floor is completely open for communications. So they can put their equipment there and not have a separate building.
Because I was looking at your page C101, your carrier lease areas, I thought that was your,
So they typically will put a generator for backup power, and we just give them enough space to put in a generator plus their communications hub. They almost certainly won't take up all that space. That's just kind of their space to use.
Okay, so if we want to pursue this to some extent, what information would we want to have gathered for the next meeting?
I think some of, not to discount what the visitor here tonight put in the packet, but some of that information from Patrick's research of what other communities do and maybe what they look at with setbacks and stuff like that. Because hearing what Tammy said, that unless the council were to kind of change that direction, that's going to reinforce the need for us to look at this in the near future.
How many towers do you have, like, around here? Just questioning.
Yeah, we have like 5. So we're a relatively small
But
business.
are you in Sioux Falls some, or?
We have most of our towers right now are out in the Black Hills.
Okay.
So I don't own any towers in Sioux Falls. No. We just built one in Hill City, South Dakota.
so the towers that we see that are just a pole, they
Mhm.
look like a big fat flagpole.
Yep.
Are those, single carrier towers?
So the ones that like you can't see any antennas around the outside.
Yeah,
is
it
that
looks
what
like
you're
it's just
talking
a big fat
about?
flagpole.
Yeah, those are called stealth poles. Those are typically only for single carriers, which most people, cities don't necessarily go for those anymore because if they're going to allow for a big structure, they want it to be able to have multiple tenants as opposed to having to build a bunch of those stealth poles.
I've seen some where they try to camouflage them and make them look like trees.
Yeah. Those stand out much more than normal
Yes,
towers
they
in my
do.
experience.
That the style that you're proposing here.
Have we belabored this one long enough, or is there some more comments?
So far, I have further research to be what other communities do.
I'd be like that one by Ben Rifle you mentioned. If you can figure, I don't know. I'd be curious what land that's sitting on. Because when I kind of just did some Google Street View, it's fairly close to housing. So I was just curious on if it's sitting on the school's property there, or if, because like right behind it, it's residential. So I just didn't know if it's sitting on school's property or if it's sitting on, I don't know.
So, yeah, what is the zoning of the property it's on? Yeah.
Yeah, or if they went on the school's property, so, whatever that zone is in Sioux Falls, I guess, because I know like Venice and stuff is zoned R1, obviously.
And if it'd be helpful, I'd be happy to bring some more examples of towers similar to this in surrounding communities and with some pictures and things. If maybe that's what Patrick would do. But I have software that I can map out where all the towers are, surrounding area and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Got the Google Street View. Yeah. I'd have. Yeah. I'd have to probably drive out there and kind of see where it is. does look like it is. So it's this guy.
I don't think we could currently go on that school south of town because it's zoned as residential.
If
Just for example, like Venice and the intermediate school, they're back. I mean, I don't know what would be behind them in the future. That'd be the only other thing, but they're going to be right up against R1 or R2, whatever it is. There's a back corner of those two schools that are a lot less further away from homes now. But you go to that example, they're going to have houses right behind there. If you look at the map of where the streets are going to be cut in.
honestly driving home, I think this lot is under construction right now because there's a lot of equipment out there digging up stuff. So I think homes are going to be right up, pretty close.
There's many examples of monopoles in Sioux Falls that tower over all sorts of structures, but I was sensitive not to just bring up Sioux Falls because I realize you guys aren't Sioux Falls, you're your own community, so I don't want to.
I know how I look at stuff is Sioux Falls is we're gonna be there someday. It's gonna happen.
It's getting close.
So a monopole is like one pole.
Yep. So a monopole
So
tower
what-
is just one steel.
Is there such a thing as a bipole?
Not
Isn't that
yet.
just two poles?
That would be. There's kind of three
Tripole?
sorts of towers. There's monopole, there's a self-support, and then there's a guy tower. And guy towers have the big cables that go off of them out to
Oh.
anchor points. But in
Okay.
town, what you normally see is a monopole.
Sure.
Since we are doing additional work for the next meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission would be the 21st. So that's when we'll hopefully have more information to you. The applicant currently has a conditional use permit response to comment period that is 60 days total, and we're in the middle of that period. Would you like to toll that period while we work through it? And you can get back to me in the future if you want, just because the clock is ticking.
Right. And if it expires, we just kind of go back to the beginning, basically.
But you lose your application fee,
Sure.
is the kind of the.
Okay. Yeah, if it's okay, if I can just exchange some emails with you and make sure I understand the whole process. But if
Yep.
we need to pause it, we can pause it. Yeah.
All right, are we done for the evening, folks? Patrick said it was going to be a long one. You were right, Patrick.
We have Paul's building permit.
Oh.
He's been working hard.
No, staff has been working hard.
I appreciate your guys' time.
Thanks for hanging in to the end of the agenda. We'll try to move you up next time. Okay. All right, thank you. All right, let's, we have a motion to adjourn.
I just want to say 38 single-family homes to date, plus 145 living units in multifamily so far this year. Built or just building permits pulled for that.
The permits have been pulled, but.
They aren't all built yet, but, yeah, that's a lot, though.
The multifamily is Aspen Ridge. They're on building 6 or 7 now. They're coming up.
Yeah.
Multifamily.
0 multifamily building permits yet last year.
Pretty amazing.
So that's more than 200, well, I can't do math that fast. 145 plus 38, almost 200 new homes in Brandon pretty quick.
If you
Dwelling
times it by 2.4 or whatever, how many people live in a house on average, that's a fair population increase once they're all full.
So 450 people.
Okay, did we have a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Brooks, yeah.
Bassett, I'll second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Aye. All right. We are adjourned.
For the recording, it is 8:48 p.m.